3 days. I have 3 days to decide what I'm going to say at his interment. How do you sift through 45 years of friendship for one statement? I was called to Mount Vernon yesterday. George was ill. Apparently, he had been working outside without a coat on. When he come in for dinner, his clothes were drenched and ice clung to his hair. At dinner, he complained of a sore throat. He even laughed at the croaking of his voice. He quickly declined. By the time I arrived at Mount Vernon at 10 in the morning, the overseer had already bled him. I examined the general. It was a bad case of quinsy. His throat was closing up. Martha sent for a second doctor. I applied Spanish fly to his throat to try to blister out the blood, and I bled him again. I prepared a mixture of sage tea and vinegar for him to gargle. He tried, but he could not. He nearly suffocated trying. I tried to get him to cough, to clear his throat. He tried, but he could not. So I sent for a third doctor. Between the hours of 3 and 4 in the afternoon, Dr. Gustav Brown and Dr. Elijah Dick arrived at Mount Vernon and examined George. Dr. Brown agreed with me that it was quinsy. But Dr. Dick believed it to be a violent inflammation of the membranes of the lining of the throat, which were causing it to close, and if not arrested immediately, would result in his death. The young Dr. Dick wanted to perform a tracheotomy. He wanted to cut a hole in his throat, to try to ease his breathing. But that might kill him. So, we agreed to bleed him again. It did not help. Finally, George spoke to me. He said, "I feel myself going. I thank you for your attention, but you should not take any more troubles about me. But let me go off quietly. I cannot last long." He never complained. Through the pain and agony of both illness and treatment, he never complained. I'll never forget the scene. I was seated by the fire. 3 servant girls, Caroline, Molly, and Charlotte, stood by the door. Martha sat at the foot of the bed. And George's secretary, Tobias Lear, hovered at the head of the bed, writing down everything. And Christopher Shields, the slave who acted as the general's valet, stood beside the bed, as he had done for hours and hours. Finally, George spoke to Lear. He said, "I am going. Have me decently buried. But do not let me be put into the vault until 3 days after I am dead." Lear could not speak. George said, "Do you understand me?" And finally Lear said, "Yes, sir." And George said, "'Tis well." Lear called me to the bedside. George went to raise his arm, but then his hand dropped, and I closed his eyes. I, who was bred among scenes of human calamity, and had so often witnessed death in its direst and most awful forms. I believed that its terrors were far too familiar to my eyes to shake my fortitude. But when I saw this great man die, it seemed to me as if the bonds of my nature were rent, and the pillars of my country's happiness had fallen to the ground. You'll have to forgive me, but I only have 3 days.